This year, we unfortunately had to cancel our Midwest Ministers Retreat, and we had a great lineup. We had Matt Merold, Ben Merold, and Daryl Bolin, who were going to be our keynote speakers, and they've agreed to answer some questions. We wanted to provide some encouragement for our ministers. And so, Matt, I appreciate you being with us today and carving out some time. And so I just have a few questions I'd like to ask you. And one of them is, how have you kept your leaders together during this time of COVID?
Yeah, in particular with our leaders that are lay leaders within the church, elders and deacons, and those that are high capacity volunteers, it hasn't been easy. At times it's been like herding cats. Not all of them are connected to the same media source. And so we had to do multiple points of connecting through communication devices like texts and emails and phone calls and even letters. And so it was just a continual thing that we had to develop where we would say, hey, on Tuesdays, you can expect that you're going to receive a text message or an email, some form of communication. So look out for your email on Tuesdays, and we'll connect, and then we'll try to meet in some way, whether that's Zoom or some kind of phone conferencing. But then again, that was difficult because not every church, especially ours, didn't have the communication equipment to make that happen for conference calls and things like that. So you put up with a lot of people over talking, and you had to find your rhythm a little bit.
With that, you've got the communication piece of that, but how about as far as keeping the unity among your leaders? Yeah,
unity was hard. We had a lot of times where all the information coming in from the government and from health departments, you had state governments, federal governments, and then local governments feeding you probably 3 different forms of information, especially as the pandemic began to roll in. And then you had people's opinions, and then you had their backgrounds come into play on that. And so everybody had their say in how they wanted to say it, or how their play on how they wanted to play it. And it finally took some voices of reason to say, what are we actually called to? And so anytime you get in those moments of a quagmire effect, or where you're kind of in the gray, is what we'd say, or in the fog, you always have to go to vision, mission, purpose. That becomes the beacon again. So what's the vision, what's the mission, what's the purpose? Okay, how does this play into the vision, mission, purpose now? That usually can settle people down, but if you're a church that is not heavy on vision, mission, purpose, and people are going to do their own things, it's going to be a wild ride, I think. And I think a lot of congregations experience that.
One of the things that I know we have talked about for a long time is that we need to be the church and not just go to church.
Yeah.
During this time of COVID, how's your church done that to impact the community and be the church?
Yeah, again, I found it really difficult because a lot about what we do and the ministry philosophy I have is about mobilization that comes from a message that has been preached to the masses. So when we couldn't mobilize in the sense of getting people in the same room and getting an effective message to them and putting them on point and sending them out, we had to rely on getting the church small again. So any church that is probably over 200 some people is not in some kind of cell group or small group probably found themselves in trouble, because we found out that as the church is large, you got to get small, but especially during times of crisis. We didn't know all the needs that surrounded us. It's really hard to minister to a neighbor. I mean, think about it. You would try to go and hand food to a neighbor. No, they don't want you on their porch. And so it became difficult to do that typical ministry style that we used to know about meeting the need, finding the need, meeting the need, and finding the hurt and healing the hurt. And so what we relied on were our small group leaders and our small groups in particular, and they would feed back to our disciple-making pastors, and they would tell those pastors, hey, this is what our small group is after. Here's how we're going to do this unique or niche style ministry. And we are just going to individually, as groups, cell groups, go out and meet our community's needs the best way we can. And so really what happened was the church didn't have a one-point ministry method or one-point ministry attack. It became all these little platoons, in a sense, that were attacking different targets. And it really worked out well because there was already a groundswell of that was developed within our cell groups or small groups. And if you don't have that part of your congregation where you can get small again, you're going to have to turn the big ship. And I think that's where you heard words like pivot, a word that I hated so much. The church has to pivot. The church has to pivot. Well, the church needed to continue to do ministry. It just had to take on some different methodologies, maybe a different philosophy. And so you didn't have to turn the whole ship. You just had to turn a few or a whole lot of small ships to get them on point to do some ministry they were probably already connected to. Yeah.
Well, if you didn't like the word pivot, you probably don't like that new normal. You know, we keep talking about the new normal.
Yeah.
So as we look forward, what do you think some of the biggest opportunities and some of the biggest obstacles are going to be that we're going to face?
Well, let me start with the obstacles. Well, we'll start with the bad news and then on the good news. The obstacles that we discovered as a ministry team were the mobilization. You couldn't get people in the room. You couldn't direct the masses in one media form. We recognized early on that any kind of media we were putting out was getting overshadowed by other media, and it became the kind of the adage of maybe less is more. And you need to pick your shots, define your shots, make them pinpointed as possible to get the message out that's clear. Everybody ran to social media, went digital quickly. And so the negative side was the mobilization wasn't there for the church. And listen, I'm one of these guys that has a ministry philosophy that says that the church can't mobilize, it can't do much of anything. That's what the church is called to do. Anytime they weren't mobile, you see in the book of Acts, I think all the way up to chapter 8, they stay in Jerusalem and God says, I really want you to go out to the rest of the world. And so you got to break from this and you got to get mobile here. You're going to have to be on mission and you're going to have to carry my message to the masses. And that means you're going to have to get out and do something. But for that to happen, there's got to be some direction, right? There's got to be somebody saying, this is the hill we're going to take. This is the achievement we're going to make. This is the goal we're going to have. And that just was so difficult during that time. I think that was the biggest obstacle as it related to the ministry that I'm a part of, was the mobilization with the message and getting a concerted effort of the whole church being on point for the same thing. That was really difficult. I think the good points was we had in that time restructured our whole staff. Which was a time that we could take. We were able to pinpoint some time that we had always wanted, but because of ministry schedules, you're just kind of running and you're in a snowball effect where we could just say, hey, we're not having to run to hospitals right now. They're not letting us in. We can't do our normal calling. So we have some pastors here that have some time. Let's focus on how we can restructure some things. In particular, how we can restructure our ministry teams, our ministry leads, and get basically our staff into a place where we can be in a structure for growth. So that were some things on the plate. So all these things that we had backloaded that we always wanted to get to, we found time to get to. And that's what people did at home. You found out that Lowe's and Home Depot had the highest sales increase they've seen in quite some time because people were doing home projects. All these things they put on the back burner, they rushed and put them forward because they had time. And we found that to be same and true in the church as well. I think some of the good points about this pandemic was it hurried some congregations up to get on the ball when it came to internet services or online church services. And that was helpful. It made people sharpen up too. They realized that the things that they were putting out probably wasn't the highest of quality and the best way to honor God. And so they sharpened those things up. I think also what it did for us, it put us back on point to pastor people. One of the things you forget about in a church is the key to church is you're pastoring people. You're getting people pastored so that they can be mobilized so they can go and reach lost people. And we just went back to the old school form of telephone calls. Mm-hmm. And we had every single staff person run through the list, I think 7-some thousand people. And everybody took a group of people every day and we just made phone calls. How you doing? How you getting through this? Is there any way the church can help? That was probably one of the greatest pastoral moments I had seen in 20 years of my ministry. Yeah.
Fantastic. There are all kinds of opportunities. You can focus on the negatives, but there are tons of opportunities out
Absolutely.
there. So with that, just one last question. There are pastors and church leaders that will be watching this that are dealing with some discouragement right now. It's a tough time. So what are some final words of encouragement that you would offer to our church leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to remember what you've been called to do. And I think sometimes we get so off point about what we're doing. And maybe you can use this time of this pandemic to get back to being a pastor, a leader, a preacher. Because you are wearing a ton of different hats more than likely. And just being able to focus back on what God has called you to be, the man or woman that God is leading you to become. And some ways this pandemic has been good because we've been allowed to shed the fat of our life and recognize that there are some things that are needed in life and there's some things that are wanted in life, and the things that are wanted in life may not be the best for our life. And as you think through that as a pastor, as a leader in the church, it might be true of your ministry as well. There might be some things that you want for your ministry, but probably aren't really needed for your ministry. And right now, I think this is the best moment where you can lean into what God has called you to and say, I'm going to sharpen up on being a better pastor. So I'm going to come up with a plan on how to pastor my people, love on them, call on them, see how they're doing. I'm going to sharpen up on some of my leadership stuff. Listen, you probably have a little bit of time, maybe, you might. This might be a moment where you can get online. There's so much online right now about how to develop your skills in leadership. And maybe it's about preaching. This is a great time to sharpen up your preaching and to maybe get back to a form where every word begins to count in your manuscript for the first time. And you're relaying a message on to someone that's looking through their digital device. And you get to talk to them in words that have meaning and that matter. And so maybe it's just sharpening up there as well. But here's what I'm getting at. You can use this time to really sharpen up your skills. And I want to give you some hope, because during this time of pandemic, it could have been the biggest problem for the church, or it could have been the biggest success for the church. And I'm hoping that you're seeing this as an opportunity, that this didn't take God off guard. This didn't put him on his heels. It might have put us on our heels, but God wants to continue to use you. And so stay open to his using, stay open to his leading, and stay open to that crazy characteristic of God that he may want to send you through. He may want to send you through a sea. He may want to march you around the desert, but you just follow his leading as you see it.
Well, Matt, thank you. Thank you for carving out the time, and I'm hoping that next year that we are going to have this retreat in person, and if schedules work out, I hope we can be together.
That'd be great. Yeah, thank you, David.
Thank you.